Have you seen this image before? A cross within a circle, strong, powerful, and, at the same time, deeply controversial. For many, it represents heritage, faith, and cultural identity. But for others, it is a symbol of hate and white supremacy. How did something so ancient and spiritual end up associated with extremist ideas? What does the Celtic cross mean in its original context, and how did it become an emblem for hate groups? Today we will unravel the history of the Celtic cross, a symbol that carries such profound historical, cultural, and ideological weight that you will never see it in the same way again. Stay with me until the end because this symbol has a lot more to say than you might think. Origin and history of the Celtic cross. The Celtic cross is one of the oldest and most intriguing symbols in human history. With roots that date back to pre-Christian times, it carries meanings that range from spirituality to cultural identity. But how did this symbol, associated with heritage and faith, become one of the most controversial emblems in the modern world? To understand, we need to delve deeply into its origins and the historical journey that shaped its meaning. The pre-Christian origin of the Celtic cross. The history of the Celtic cross begins long before its association with Christianity. Pre-Celtic civilizations. Archaeological excavations in Europe have revealed that symbols similar to the Celtic cross already existed in Neolithic cultures. These circular designs, often engraved on stones, were used to represent the sun and natural cycles. The circle around the cross symbolized eternity and the connection between the elements of nature, especially the sun, which was central to many ancient religions. The Celts and their spiritual symbols. Celtic culture, which thrived in Western Europe between 1200 BC and 400 AD, adopted and adapted these symbols. For the Celts, the cross represented the four cardinal points, the cycles of life, birth, death, rebirth, and the intersection between the physical and spiritual world. Question: why is the circle so important in Celtic symbolism? Answer: to the Celts, the circle symbolized the continuity and interconnectedness of all things, a reminder that life is an eternal cycle. The Christian adaptation of the Celtic cross. With the arrival of Christianity in Europe, many pagan symbols were incorporated into Christian traditions to facilitate the conversion of local people. The cross and Christianity in Ireland. In Ireland, St. Patrick, the country's patron saint, is often credited with combining the Christian cross with the Celtic circle, creating what we know today as the Celtic cross. The cross symbolized the Christian faith, while the circle around it represented the sun, a familiar symbol to the Celts. This fusion helped to Christianize local traditions without completely erasing them. Monuments and artifacts. The first Celtic crosses appeared on stone monuments in Ireland and Scotland, often decorated with intricate patterns of knots and spirals, typical of Celtic art. These monuments were used as religious and cultural landmarks, symbolizing the union of Christian and Celtic spirituality. Question: why did the Christian Church incorporate pagan symbols like the Celtic cross? Answer: the Church used this strategy to facilitate cultural and religious transition, adapting local symbols to integrate Christianity into existing traditions. The Celtic cross as a symbol of cultural identity. In the following centuries, the Celtic cross became an emblem of identity for the people of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Symbol of cultural resistance. During the Viking invasions and later colonizations, the Celtic cross was seen as a symbol of resistance and preservation of Celtic culture. Cultural Renaissance. In the 19th century, during the Celtic Revival, the symbol gained new popularity as an icon of cultural pride and Irish heritage. Question: how did a spiritual symbol become a marker of cultural identity? Answer: the Celtic cross has been reinterpreted over time to reflect the struggles and pride of the Celtic people, becoming a multifaceted symbol. The Celtic cross in the modern era. Over time, the Celtic cross stopped being just a religious or cultural symbol and began to be used in different contexts. Heritage and tourism. Today, the Celtic cross is one of the most recognized symbols of Irish and Scottish culture, widely used in jewelry, tattoos, and souvenirs. Art and architecture. The symbol is still found in churches and historical monuments, preserving its spiritual and cultural connection. Question: how does the Celtic cross remain relevant in the modern world? Answer: its universality as a symbol of faith, culture, and identity has ensured its survival and popularity. The duality of the symbol. Despite its rich origins and positive meanings, the Celtic cross, as we will see in the next part, was appropriated by extremist groups in the 20th century. Final question of this part: how was a symbol of spirituality and culture transformed into an emblem of hate? Answer: the answer lies in ideological manipulation and the power of symbols to unite or divide, depending on who uses them and for what. Appropriation and modern context of the Celtic Cross. I'll ask you a question. Did you know that the Celtic Cross, a spiritual and cultural symbol, was appropriated by white supremacist and extremist groups? This transformation took place throughout the 20th century and continues today, creating a marked divide between its original meaning and its modern association with hateful ideologies. But how did this happen? Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. The appropriation of the Celtic Cross by extremists is a classic example of how powerful symbols can be distorted to serve specific interests. It stopped being an emblem of faith and culture and became a visual tool to spread racist and nationalist messages. How and why was the Celtic Cross appropriated? I'll ask you another question. Do you know how such an ancient and sacred symbol ended up in the hands of extremist groups? This shift began in the early 20th century, when nationalist movements began using the Celtic Cross as a marker of racial identity. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Far-right groups in Europe have begun to reinterpret the Celtic Cross as a symbol of racial purity and Aryan heritage. They adopted its iconic form, the cross and circle, to represent ideas of racial superiority and national unity, completely distorting its original meaning. The Celtic Cross in the 20th century, a tool of extremism. I'll ask you one more question. Have you ever heard that the Celtic Cross was used by fascist movements during the Second World War? Yes, this symbol, which once represented spirituality and culture, was appropriated by authoritarian regimes to spread their propaganda. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. During World War II, some nationalist movements in Europe began using the Celtic Cross on their coats of arms and flags, associating it with fascist ideologies. This marked the beginning of his connection with political extremism. Why is the Celtic Cross popular among white supremacist groups? I'll ask you another question. Do you know why the Celtic Cross has become so widely used by white supremacists? This has to do with its simple yet impactful aesthetic and its connection to European heritage. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. White supremacist groups adopted the Celtic Cross because it refers to a European tradition, which reinforces their ideas of nationalism and racial exclusion. The circle around the cross is also used to symbolize unity and racial purity, concepts central to these groups. The Celtic Cross on the internet and in modern culture. I'll ask you one more question. Did you know that the internet helped popularize the Celtic Cross as a symbol of hate? The digital age has breathed new life into this emblem, spreading its use among online extremist communities. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Forums like 4chan and platforms like Telegram have become meeting points for white supremacists who use the Celtic Cross in avatars, memes and posts. The internet has amplified the dissemination of the symbol, making it more accessible and visible than ever. The impact of appropriation on symbol perception. I'll ask you another question. Do you think it's still possible to separate the Celtic Cross from its negative associations? For many, this seems impossible, given the weight of extremist ideologies that accompany it. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. The appropriation of the Celtic Cross by extremists has damaged its image in legitimate cultural and religious contexts. Communities that use the Celtic Cross as a spiritual symbol face prejudice, as the symbol has been tarnished by its association with hate. The Celtic Cross in modern cases of bullying and hatred. I'll ask you one more question. Did you know that the Celtic Cross often appears in hate crimes and vandalism? It is used as an intimidation tool by extremist groups. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. The Celtic Cross is often painted in synagogues, mosques and minority neighborhoods as a sign of threat. These acts of vandalism are intended to spread fear and reaffirm the presence of racist ideologies. Efforts to combat the use of the Celtic Cross by extremists. I'm going to ask you one last question in this part. What is being done to combat the use of the Celtic Cross as a symbol of hate? Several governments and human rights organizations are trying to reverse this scenario. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. In some countries such as Germany and France, the use of the Celtic Cross in contexts that promote hatred is illegal. Additionally, organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League monitor the symbol's use and educate the public about its negative and historical associations. The Celtic Cross, a symbol of spirituality and cultural heritage, has been manipulated and turned into an emblem of hate by extremist groups. However, the cultural and historical context of this symbol still lives on in many communities that fight to preserve its original meaning. Current debate and social impact of the Celtic Cross. I'll ask you a question. Do you think the Celtic Cross can still be used as a symbol of culture and spirituality, or has it been irreversibly tarnished by its association with hate? This is one of the most frequent debates when it comes to this symbol. While some believe that it is possible to recover its original meaning, others argue that its public use should be limited due to the negative impact it carries. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. The meaning of the Celtic cross is largely dependent on the context in which it is used and the intentions behind its display. This makes the symbol a point of cultural and ideological conflict in the modern world. Why is the Celtic cross still used in cultural and religious contexts? I'll ask you a question. Did you know that, despite its appropriation by extremists, the Celtic cross is still widely used in legitimate religious and cultural contexts? This happens mainly in countries like Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. In Celtic and Christian communities, the Celtic cross remains an emblem of faith, culture, and heritage. It appears in churches, historical monuments, and even jewelry and works of art, preserving its original meaning as a symbol of spirituality and divine connection. The controversy in the modern West. I'll ask you a question. Do you think people understand the difference between the original Celtic cross and its version appropriated by extremists? In fact, many are unable to make this distinction, which creates controversy around the symbol. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. In the West, the perception of the Celtic cross has been profoundly affected by its association with white supremacist groups. This leads to misunderstandings and prejudice against those who use it in legitimate cultural contexts, especially outside Europe. The Celtic cross in media and popular culture. I'll ask you a question. Did you know that the Celtic cross frequently appears in films, series, and even video games? This representation can reinforce or question its historical and modern meanings. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. In many productions, the Celtic cross is used to represent Celtic or Christian heritage, but it also appears in contexts related to villains or extremist movements. This duality reflects the complexity of its meaning in today's society. Social networks and the debate around the symbol. I'll ask you another question. Did you know that social media has amplified the debate around the Celtic cross, making it an even more polarized symbol? The internet plays a central role in how the public interprets the symbol. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. While extremists use the Celtic cross to spread hateful ideologies online, cultural and religious communities use the same platforms to educate the public about its original meaning. The result is a constant debate that reflects the struggle for control of the narrative around the symbol. How does the impact of the Celtic cross vary around the world? I'll ask you a question. Do you think the impact of the Celtic cross is the same in all parts of the world? The answer may surprise you. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. In countries like Ireland and Scotland, the symbol is widely respected for its cultural value. In countries like the USA, it is often associated with extremism, due to the influence of white supremacist groups. This shows how cultural context influences the perception of symbols. Efforts to redefine the meaning of the Celtic cross. I'll ask you one more question. Do you think it's possible to rescue the original meaning of the Celtic cross? This is a mission that many cultural and religious groups are trying to fulfill. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Educational organizations and Celtic communities have run campaigns to inform the public about the spiritual and cultural roots of the Celtic cross, highlighting its history as a symbol of unity and spirituality, not division. The importance of education in the Celtic cross debate. I'll ask you one last question in this part. Do you think education can change the public perception of the Celtic cross? Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Yes, education plays a crucial role in clarifying the different meanings of the Celtic cross. By teaching the history and context of the symbol, it is possible to disarm extremist ideologies and rescue its original essence. The debate surrounding the Celtic cross reflects the complexity of dealing with symbols that have contrasting meanings. While some communities see it as a sacred emblem, others associate it with hatred and division. The key to resolving this controversy lies in education and open dialogue about its historical and cultural context. Historical lessons and reflections on the Celtic cross. I'm going to ask you a question. What does the story of the Celtic cross teach us about the power of symbols? His journey from spirituality and unity to becoming an emblem of hate is a powerful example of how symbols can be manipulated, given new meanings, and used to influence societies. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. The Celtic cross teaches us that symbols are not inherently good or bad. Their meaning is shaped by who uses them and the context in which they are applied. This learning is essential for navigating a world where symbols carry complex and often conflicting meanings. Why are symbols so powerful? I'll ask you another question. Have you ever stopped to think about why symbols have such a huge impact on society? They are a universal language that transcends words and connects ideas to emotions. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Symbols are powerful because they communicate deep meanings quickly and visually. They have the power to unite people around an idea, but also to divide and manipulate. In the case of the Celtic Cross, its simplicity and aesthetics made it an ideal vehicle for conveying messages of both unity and exclusion. How to prevent symbol appropriation in the future? I'll ask you a question. Is there any way to prevent symbols from being distorted in the future? This may seem impossible, but the answer lies in how we deal with its history and meaning. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. To prevent the appropriation of symbols, it is crucial to educate people about their legitimate origins and contexts. Awareness and open dialogue help reduce the impact of ideological manipulation, disarming those who seek to use them to divide and intimidate. The role of education in the reframing of symbols. I'll ask you one more question. Do you think education can help rescue the Celtic Cross from its negative associations? Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Yes, education is a powerful tool for changing perceptions. Teaching about the original history of the Celtic Cross, from its Celtic and Christian roots to its modern use, can help reclaim its meaning as a symbol of spirituality and culture. Should we ban or reframe controversial symbols? I'll ask you another question. Do you think symbols like the Celtic Cross should be banned or given a new meaning? This is an issue that divides opinions and deserves reflection. Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. Banning symbols can prevent their use by extremist groups, but it can also alienate communities that use them legitimately. Reframing symbols, although more challenging, offers a more inclusive and educational solution, preserving their cultural and spiritual heritage. What does the Celtic Cross teach us about culture and identity? I'm going to ask you one last question in this part. What does the story of the Celtic Cross tell us about the importance of culture and identity? Now I'm going to answer the question I asked you. The story of the Celtic Cross reminds us that symbols are reflections of our cultural and spiritual identity. When appropriate, they can be used to manipulate and divide, but they also have the potential to inspire unity and mutual respect, depending on how we interpret and use them. The Celtic Cross is a symbol full of complex meanings, ranging from Celtic and Christian spirituality to its appropriation by hateful ideologies. His trajectory teaches us that symbols do not have a fixed meaning. They are shaped by the context and intentions of those who use them. Today, more than ever, we need to be vigilant regarding the use of symbols in our society. Education, dialogue, and awareness are key to preserving their original meanings and combating their use for hateful and divisive purposes. In this video, we explore the history, appropriation, social impact, and lessons left by the Celtic Cross. Now it's your turn to act. Share this video, educate yourself, and help create a world where respect prevails over hate.